All right, so today we're going deep, really deep into the migrant crisis happening at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Hmm.
We've got, well, we've got a lot to dig through.
Yeah.
News reports, economic data. We even have some expert analysis.
Should be interesting.
It should be, and honestly, you might be surprised at just how much more there is to this story
Oh, I'm sure.
than, what we see in those quick headlines.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of get lost in all the numbers and policy debates.
Right.
But we can't forget that at the heart of it all, it's people, real people who are making some really, really tough choices.
Exactly. And that's why we're going to start with the story today.
Okay.
Al Jazeera, they interviewed this Venezuelan family. And, they're stuck in Tapachula, Mexico, desperately trying to get to the U.S.
Oh, wow.
They describe feeling trapped, almost like they're prisoners.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder of just how many obstacles these migrants face.
And, their experience kind of highlights something we'll be looking at throughout this whole deep dive.
Okay.
Why are so many people willing to risk everything to go on this journey? What's pushing them? What's pulling them?
And it's not just the journey itself, right?
No, not at all.
I mean, increased security, checkpoints everywhere.
No.
It's dangerous.
Very much so.
And then even if they make it to the border,
Right.
they run into this mountain of paperwork,
Oh, yeah.
limited appointments for asylum applications. The shelters are overcrowded.
It's tough.
Yeah, it's a pretty bleak picture.
Absolutely. And, that Al Jazeera report mentioned something I thought was interesting. The prevalence of smugglers.
Right.
And these smugglers, they often exploit how desperate the migrants are.
Oh, for sure.
We're talking extortion, kidnapping, just awful stuff.
That adds a whole other layer of danger to a journey that's already, perilous.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Another family, this one from Guatemala, they shared that they're constantly living in fear.
Oh, gosh.
Imagine traveling with your kids, never knowing if you and your family are going to be safe.
I can't even imagine.
It really makes you question what kind of circumstances would drive someone to that point.
What's really important to remember is that this isn't just a U.S.-Mexico issue.
That's true.
Global migration to those OECD countries, it actually hit an all-time high last year.
Wow.
This family's story, it's specific to their experience, but it's really just one tiny piece of a much larger global trend.
Good point. Gives you some perspective.
Yeah.
So if this is happening worldwide, what's going on specifically here in North America?
Well, I think we need to zoom in and look at the economics,
Okay.
the push and pull factors, so to speak.
Yeah.
On the push side, we see economic distress and also violence. Those play a major role in pushing people to leave.
Makes sense.
Our sources actually include this report from Professor Simrahan.
Okay.
He's an economist from Bangladesh.
Okay.
And he paints a pretty dire picture of the situation over there.
Oh, wow.
He points to low revenue, a fragile financial sector, the lack of diversified exports.
That's what.
Yeah, and it all adds up to massive unemployment, especially for young people.
So they're leaving behind hardship, and then they're pulled to the U.S.
Exactly.
We have data that shows a huge majority of Americans, like 71%,
Yeah.
recognize that the U.S. is seen as this, land of opportunity.
Right, even if the image isn't always true.
Even if it's not always true.
But that perception, it's so strong.
Yeah.
Higher wages, access to social services, even the hope for just a better quality of life.
You can see why someone would want to come here.
Yeah, someone struggling in a place like Bangladesh might risk everything for a shot at what they see as the American dream.
It's powerful, right? That contrast.
Very powerful.
You have this deep desperation on one side
Yeah.
and this maybe idealized image of opportunity on the other.
One of our experts,
Okay.
Ben Brindle from the Migration Observatory at Oxford, he points out that the actual impact of all this migration on Western economies, it's actually pretty small. Yeah, it's fascinating, right? You have these massive flows of people, all driven by this economic desperation.
Right.
But the actual effects on the countries they're going to, maybe they aren't as big as we think.
That makes you wonder then what's driving all the political talk about it.
Yeah, for sure.
It seems like there's this disconnect between the data and what the public thinks,
There is.
which is often what drives these policy decisions.
Often, yeah.
And speaking of policy, we can't ignore how both the U.S. and Mexico are tightening their grip on immigration.
Definitely not.
There's this perception in the U.S.,
Okay.
and our data backs this up,
Mm-hmm.
that it's just too easy for migrants to stay once they get here.
Yeah.
We see a lot of debate about the asylum process and whether it's being exploited or not, and temporary protected status. That's another hot topic.
Right. And then on the Mexican side, there's been this crackdown.
Oh, yeah.
Mexico's under pressure from the U.S. to ramp up enforcement within their own borders.
Yeah, I read about that.
They even have this system where they bus migrants back south,
Really?
even after they've traveled so far north.
Wow.
It seems counterintuitive, but it highlights how complex this web of policies really is.
Definitely complicated.
And it raises questions about, human rights.
For sure.
Some experts are concerned about the transparency and the accountability of these measures.
We should look into that more.
We should, yeah.
Okay, so we've got this global phenomenon fueled by economic desperation and this maybe sometimes misleading perception of opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's all happening within this insanely complex system of policies and enforcement.
It is.
Where do we go from here?
Well, I think a good next step is to really unpack those arguments about the impact of this migration.
Okay.
Is it really hurting the economy, or are there benefits that we're not seeing?
Interesting.
Let's dive into that next.
Sounds good.
Okay.
We just spent some time, exploring those forces, bringing migrants to the U.S.-Mexico border. And it's easy to get lost in the statistics and policies.
It's true, but it's important to remember that those numbers, they represent actual people.
Right.
Each with their own story to tell.
And we can't forget that, right?
No, definitely not.
Remember that Venezuelan family from the Al Jazeera report?
Yeah.
Those parents who they felt so trapped.
It was tough to hear.
Yeah, with really no good options.
And that Guatemalan family.
Yeah.
Traveling with their kids, living with that constant fear.
Oh, yeah.
Those stories, while just a small glimpse into this huge crisis, they represent the struggles of millions, literally millions of people facing similar things.
Yeah.
It really drives home the human cost of all of this.
Yeah.
Something we can't just measure in dollars and cents.
Absolutely. And it's a good reminder that we can't just focus on the what of migration,
Right.
but also the why.
Yeah.
We talk about, economic opportunities in the U.S. being a big draw, but I imagine it's got to be more than just, wanting higher wages.
You're right. Absolutely.
It's got to be more.
It's about hope, a hope for something better,
Right.
a future where there's no violence
Yeah.
and no poverty, a chance to really build a life for themselves and for their kids.
And that kind of resonates with what we saw in one of the sources.
Yeah.
It really broke down the draw of the U.S., the possibility of higher wages, even in those low-wage jobs.
Right.
The hope for access to things like social services, just an overall better quality of life.
Yeah, and let's not forget the power of community, too.
No, that's true.
Those established immigrant communities, they can offer a really important support network.
Yeah.
Cultural connections, a sense of belonging.
Right, it's so important.
It is, especially when you're in a new country.
Absolutely. It's like having a built-in safety net.
Yeah.
When everything else feels so uncertain.
Exactly.
But it's, we have to acknowledge that this perception of opportunity, this American dream,
Right.
It doesn't always match the reality.
You're right. That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
While there are some success stories out there, a lot of migrants, they end up facing exploitation, discrimination.
Right.
A constant struggle just to get by.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do we balance this need for economic opportunity with the reality of those challenges? How do we make sure that migrants are seen as more than just cheap labor?
That's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, what would a system that actually, protects migrants look like?
Well, it would have to be multifaceted.
Okay.
One that tackles the root causes, pushing people to migrate.
Right.
And also, the things that are drawing them to certain places.
Yeah.
It has to be a both-hand approach.
Right. Okay, so let's break that down.
Sure.
On the push side, we're talking about things like poverty,
Yeah.
violence, lack of opportunity, all that.
Exactly. We need long-term solutions. Investing in economic development,
Yeah.
supporting democratic institutions, promoting human rights in those regions.
Right. That's huge.
It's about creating a world where people don't feel like they have to flee
Yeah.
out of desperation.
Out of desperation.
And then on the pull side,
Right.
it's about making sure the countries that benefit from migrant labor are doing so ethically,
Right. Responsibly. So that means what? Strengthening labor protections?
Definitely.
Cracking down on those exploitative employers and creating those pathways to legal status.
Right. Absolutely.
One of the experts, Ben Brindle
Yeah.
from the Migration Observatory at Oxford,
Yeah.
he argues that the overall economic impact of migration,
Hmm.
it's actually pretty small.
It is. It's interesting.
So if that's the case, then why is there so much resistance to creating more humane immigration policies?
That's a good question.
That's a good question.
And it's a question that goes beyond just, economics.
Right.
It goes into politics, social anxieties,
Yeah.
and often I think just a lack of understanding
Mm-hmm.
about what migration really is, what it
Yeah.
entails.
It sounds like there's a real disconnect
There is.
between the data and how people view this.
Absolutely.
And that's, I guess that's where the media comes in.
For sure.
Public discourse, education, it's crucial.
It is. We have to move past these overly simplistic narratives
Mm-hmm.
and start having some real conversations.
Right, more nuanced conversation.
Yeah, conversations that acknowledge both the challenges and the opportunities.
The good and the bad.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to challenge those stereotypes
Right.
and start, really seeing the humanity of migrants.
That's so important. It starts with listening to their stories.
Yeah.
Understanding their motivations.
Right.
Recognizing their contributions.
And it can't just be about changing minds, right?
No, definitely not.
It's got to be about action.
Yes.
Actual, policies
there's
that
let's
reflect
say-
those values and create a more just system.
Absolutely. Moving away from that, don't ask, don't tell
Yeah.
system that
Yeah.
allows for so much exploitation.
Yeah.
That's crucial.
Yeah.
We need those pathways to legal status.
Mm-hmm.
We have to hold employers accountable,
Right, accountable for their actions.
ensuring fair treatment and dignity for everyone,
Yeah.
regardless of their immigration status.
It sounds like a pretty tall order.
It is. It is.
So what are some of those, specific policy solutions that could actually make a difference?
Well, that's what we're going to get into in the last part of this deep dive. We'll look at different approaches to immigration reform. We'll analyze their impact,
Okay.
and we'll think about how governments and civil society can work together
Mm-hmm.
to create a more humane future.
Sounds good. Okay, so we've talked about a lot here.
Yeah.
The human stories, those economic forces. We even
Yeah.
talked about, exploitation and how awful that is.
Yeah, the reality of it.
But let's get to the big question. What can actually be done about all this? What are the solutions?
It's easy to get overwhelmed thinking about it,
Right.
wondering if this broken system can actually be fixed.
Yeah.
But there are paths forward,
Okay.
things we can do to help those migrants right now,
Okay.
and also, address the bigger long-term challenges.
So let's get specific.
Okay.
What do those solutions actually look like?
Well, one major area we have to focus on is immigration reform,
Okay.
creating more legal ways for migrants to come to the U.S. The current system, it's so restrictive.
Yeah.
It forces people to take these huge risks, which makes them so vulnerable.
It seems, I don't know, counterintuitive.
Yeah,
We know there's a big demand for labor in the U.S.
huge.
Wouldn't it make sense to expand those, legal immigration programs?
I think so.
I mean, fill those gaps.
Yeah,
And at the same time, make it safer for the migrants themselves.
exactly. It's a win-win.
Right. It could help the U.S. economy
Yeah,
and the migrants,
and it could help reduce undocumented immigration.
that's where we see a lot of the problems.
Right, a lot of the exploitation.
So what are some of the ideas being tossed around for immigration reform?
Well, one idea is increasing the number of visas,
Okay.
both temporary and permanent.
Okay.
And we could target specific sectors.
Right, where there are those worker shortages.
Exactly, like agriculture, healthcare.
Tech. Yeah.
And, that could also help reduce our reliance on things like the H-2A visa,
Oh, right, which has all those problems.
which has so many problems.
Oh.
Yeah.
So by, providing more options,
Yeah.
we can create a system that's more balanced,
Right.
more fair for everyone.
Okay.
Another proposal is creating a path to citizenship.
Oh, right, for undocumented immigrants?
Yeah, the ones who are already here living and working.
That one gets political.
It does.
But wouldn't it make sense
I think so.
from both, an economic standpoint
Yeah.
and just a human one?
From all sides, really. I mean,
Yeah.
these people, they're already contributing.
Right, they're here.
They're already part of our economy, our society.
Yeah, give them legal status.
Let them come out of the shadows,
Right.
pay their taxes, really become part of the community.
And it would get rid of that fear of being deported,
Oh, absolutely.
which I imagine keeps a lot of people silent.
Yeah, it prevents them from speaking up.
about,
Yeah.
abuses or advocating for their rights.
Exactly. It's about recognizing their value,
Hmm.
regardless of their status.
But even if we fix all that,
The immigration system,
hmm,
we still have the exploitation that's happening right now.
you're right. Immigration reform is just one part of it.
Okay.
We also need better labor protections.
Okay.
We need to enforce those laws we already have
Mm-hmm.
and hold those employers accountable.
Right.
I mean, tougher penalties for wage theft, for unsafe conditions, for discrimination,
The whole 9 yards.
all of it, yeah.
And make sure workers know their rights.
Absolutely. All workers,
Yeah.
regardless of their status.
They need to feel safe to report abuse.
They do.
Okay, and what about, the don't ask, don't tell system?
That's a big one.
Yeah.
It allows employers to just look the other way.
With the fake documents, right?
Yeah, all day.
So instead of, punishing the worker,
Right.
we need to go after the employer.
Yeah, shift the responsibility.
To the one who's actually taking advantage.
Exactly.
That seems, I don't know, that seems like a big shift.
It is. It's a shift in policy, but also in our attitude.
Yeah, how we think about things.
It's necessary, though,
Yeah.
if we want to make a system that's truly fair.
And it's not just about the government, is it?
No, civil society has a big role to play.
What can they do?
They can provide direct support,
Okay.
legal aid, education, advocacy.
Right.
They can also put pressure on businesses,
Okay.
watch their labor practices,
Yeah.
push for change.
So it sounds like everyone needs to work together.
They do. The government, businesses, civil society.
It's a big problem.
It is. It's complex.
Yeah.
But we can make progress.
So what can our listeners do? What can, regular people do?
I think it starts with education.
Okay.
Learn about it, talk about it,
Hmm.
support the groups working to make things better,
Yeah.
and use your voice.
Yeah.
Talk to your elected officials,
Yeah.
push for better policies.
Be a part of the solution.
Exactly.
We've covered a lot today.
We have.
What's the one thing you want listeners to remember?
I keep thinking about that Venezuelan family.
The ones from Tapachula.
Yeah, in Tapachula.
Yeah.
Their story, and so many others like it.
Yeah.
It reminds us that these aren't just numbers and policies.
Right.
These are people
With families.
with hopes, with dreams, with fears.
Yeah.
Just like us.
Their journeys, they're so dangerous.
They are.
So uncertain.
But they speak to that,
That resilience.
that resilience.
But
Yeah.
pursuit of a better life.
And that deserves our empathy,
Yeah.
our understanding.
And our action.
Yeah, we have to create a world where everyone has that chance.
To thrive. To succeed.
Exactly.
This has been a deep dive.
It is.
A deep dive into a very complex issue.
For sure.
But hopefully you've learned something.
I hope so.
Maybe you even have some ideas about how to get involved.
Yeah, that would be great.
The conversation doesn't end here, though.
Definitely not.
Keep learning. Keep
Yeah.
asking questions.
And keep pushing for a better world.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.